follow me through my presentation here. But as Anna was saying, yes, my focus is very much on making people visible in public space. Gehl is all about putting people first. I think for many, many years we have thought about planning of cities and urban development in terms of the built form and the built environment only. And really, yet, when we think about cities, it's all about the life that takes place between the buildings. It's about the communities who live there and the lifestyles of people living in cities. So we are really an interdisciplinary practice based in Copenhagen that have grown out of Jan Gehl's urban theories. And we are interdisciplinary in the way that we are both architects and city planners and urbanists, but we are also social scientists. So I have anthropologists and ethnographers and those types of experts as well working in our team. And I was actually a young student of Jan Gehl in the early 90s and started doing some projects together with Jan. And at the time, back in the late 90s, there was even very little talk about sustainability. So when we started our practice in May 2000, it was fairly new to even think about sustainable urban development and to even think about the life between the buildings and not only the buildings themselves was pretty new at the time. So Jan had been studying these urban principles and life between buildings for decades. He started working in the 60s on his research. And my focus was very much on trying to transform some of Jan's principles into an urban design practice, a way of working in cities. At the time, Jan had talked a lot about these things, and he had been lecturing, he had been writing books about it, but I don't think there was a real sort of practice related to how to really engage with people in urban design. Have you read any of Jan Gehl's books in relation to your studies? No one? A few people raising their hands, okay. But maybe afterwards you can be inspired to go back. I think Jan's very first book called Life Between Buildings that came out in '72 has been translated to about 28 different languages around the world. So it's definitely still worth reading. But just to, before I sort of head into my presentation, I actually came to Vienna for the first time in 2009, when we as a practice started working together with Erzherzog-Johann-Platz on a public ground strategy for that new development. And a partitur for public spaces, or guidelines for public spaces, came out of that process. And the way that these guidelines are organized in terms of life, space, and the building edge, I think really represents our methodology in a very simple way. Because traditional master planning often looks at the buildings first, then we start organizing the buildings, and in between the buildings we start thinking about traffic and configuration of space, and the very last thing we are starting to program or think about is what is going to happen between the buildings. Who are going to move here? What are the activities that are going to take place? What is going to happen summer, winter, different times of the week or the day? And our methodology is very much to turn that traditional planning process upside down and start with life. Who are going to be here? How can we actively invite people to come to this particular place? What is the program going to be? How do we make sure that there is something for the children, for the families, for the elderly? And then how do we design mobility patterns around that? And how do we enable a sustainable lifestyle in order to be able to walk, take public transport and so forth? And then we build up the program and go back and look at this project that we did now 6 years ago. And I would be very interested to hear some of your viewpoints, because I haven't actually been back to that new development. So maybe you can tell me how it's coming along. But really, as Anna was mentioning, I'm very concerned about the paradigm shift that I believe is happening in planning these years. And I strongly believe that a paradigm shift has to happen. Because in the sort of traditional way of planning, you could say we invented city planning back in the 60s. We started optimizing individual systems. And now I think all cities around the world have come to realize that planning is about integrating solutions and integrating approaches. And we need to succeed with a much more complex urban system, so that the city is much more of an organism, something that constantly changes. And that requires a paradigm shift in terms of the way we plan, the way we think we can plan, the way we actually can use our methodology and so forth. I can see that some of the words have shifted a little bit when we changed computer here, but I hope that you can still read the text. We have some primary big new demands in cities today: climate change, mitigation, adaptation, economic scarcity of resources, and demographic changes in terms of aging population, but also urbanization in general. And those three issues, all cities around the globe are sharing those issues. And that requires new design solutions for energy reduction, integrated mobility solutions, reuse of material, new demands of using data and thinking smart, working smarter, not harder necessarily. And we have new housing demands for families and general sort of densification that we need to plan for. To the core of those three themes, I find three main subjects that I would like to talk about tonight. One of those is people, of course. The people moving about in the city, living in the city, and the life that takes place between the buildings. This is just an image from Copenhagen and our most sort of central pedestrian spine, where we have about 80,000 people walking up and down on a daily basis. Public space being the other topic that I think combines all of these different challenges across, which is about the public space being a connector and a social equalizer of our society today. It's the DNA that enables us to come together as a society in the city. And then the last subject that I will talk about today is process. The fact that we are moving away from a project-oriented way of thinking about planning to a process-oriented way of thinking about planning. And that relates to the different levels of scale and urban governance that we see in cities, from region to city or municipality to the actual spatial planning, all the way down to the individual people and communities. But also, it relates to the way that we have organized ourselves in the urban departments. In traditional cities, we have the planning department that are dealing with the buildings, we have the transport department dealing with roads and traffic, we have the landscape department or maintenance department dealing with trees, the cultural and social departments dealing with people. So we've segregated all of these different things up in different departments, and we now actually have to figure out how all of this comes together in more integrated urban solutions. So those are the three topics that I will be speaking about. And Vienna, I think, very much as I think Austria, Switzerland, Germany are sort of at the very forefront of thinking about sustainability. When we think about the buildings and the LEED certificates and all of these different qualities that we are looking for. But having sustainable buildings and having a high level of technology does not necessarily Vienna right now. We are moving away from sustainability thinking towards thinking about livability and resilience. And that is why public space is becoming so important for cities like Vienna. Because also here the city is densifying and more people have to use the public space. We have to negotiate who has the right to the public space and how can that spatial framework allows us to live together in a more dense community. So what are the needs of people? If one of the design processes that align with people's needs, how do we understand it better? Well, these are some of the things that Gehl started looking into way back in the 60s. He started studying people's behavior. What do they seem to prefer when they sit or they act in the cities? We have a lot of social needs as people. About 60% of the European adult population live alone in the cities today. So a lot of people are actually actively choosing to be out in the public spaces because they want to be together with other people. We are attracted to places that are active, where other people are. And if we can choose between a place that is quiet or dark or maybe not as lively, and another space that is maybe more lively and there are more people activities, most people tend to choose the route that have other people there because it feels more attractive to us and it feels safer. But we also we're orienting ourselves through the urban environment by using our brain, by using our senses, and we actually need about one stimuli for every 4th second to keep our brain stimulated through the urban environment. And we love being places where there is a lot of details, a lot of complexity, a lot of activities at the ground floor, rather than being places where we can just overview the whole building in one glimpse. Man is man's greatest joy is one of the sayings that Jan have expressed. And this image from Paris is just one example of people can easily be in the same space and they are attracted to places where there are other people, even though they might be doing things by themselves, like the couples that are sort of very intimate when you think about it. They're sitting right next to the old or the elderly woman here who is kind of polishing her nails. All the other women engage in a conversation with each other. So we can be private, almost private in the public space, engaged in different activities, but we are still attracted to some of these places where we can sit and do that in relation to other people. Public spaces are for all, as I said, and the streets of our cities are our living room. It's like the living room you have at home, where you want to relax, or you want to exercise, or you want to be together with other people. And the more the city streets can actually be that living room, the more we have a sense of what the culture of that city might be. But there is needs for new types of tools to allow us to see that culture. How many of you have been out doing surveys in relation to your work, looking at pedestrian numbers or counts or interviewing people and so forth? Is that part of your design process? Some people are nodding, yeah. That's excellent. Something that we think about a lot is, you can say, I just had a conversation with Ulla actually before the lecture here. And when you design a software, a designer would always design the software and then test it and then try and make it better and then sell upgrades so that we can constantly improve this design of ours. But we seldom think about the urban environment in that way because it's costly, it's difficult difficult to constantly improve. But what if we could test, measure, and refine, and constantly learn from people's reactions to what we do, and then alter our design, and constantly improve that urban environment, and make that way of working integrated into our planning institutions? That would be quite a different life cycle than what we see today. There is a saying that you measure what you care about. And there are so many cities. I don't know any city around the world that doesn't have a traffic department. They have lots of numbers on traffic, economic growth, environmental impact assessments, and so forth. But very, very few cities are actually measuring people. Very few cities are measuring how the cultural life of the city is changing, how many pedestrians are walking through the streets, whether the people that we have, the life that is taking place, is representative for the people living in the city, and so forth. It would be remarkable if we could have more departments for public life in cities around the world. One of the things that we are doing is trying to make people visible in all of the cities where we go in and work, by actually counting them, by interviewing them, by mapping them, by making observational studies and so forth. Simply to be able to come to the mayor and say, you have 80,000 cars in this street, but you have 120,000 pedestrians. A lot of times the decision makers and our decision makers and elected officials, they don't know, because we don't necessarily have those numbers. Some of the things we do is observational studies. We do intercept surveys, looking at demographic studies, pulling all the data that we can. When we look at a whole city or a city district or a place. And we also use technology and GIS and other sort of social media programs to draw data. So actually trying to use many different types of methods to draw this data about cities. So with this introduction, I want to show you 4 different projects to show you how we have actually applied this working method. And the first city I'm going to focus on is New York City, which is an example of the people theme in my lecture here. New York was a city I started working in back in 2007, so it's already quite a lot of years ago. Janet Sadikan was a sort of a new elected official, commissioner with the Bloomberg administration. And she came to visit us in Copenhagen with her new team. And we biked around with her and her team for 2 days. And it was actually quite nice because some of them hadn't biked in a city for years, only when they were teenagers or kids. So we actually rented tandems for them, so that we could have a more experienced biker in the front and a less experienced biker in the back. But having that experience from Copenhagen, biking around for 2 days, feeling what it means to be in a city where you can walk everywhere, you can bicycle everywhere, you can bring your bicycle on public transport, it feels safe at night, people live downtown, it's not just a business district and so forth, was such an impressive experience for them to bring back to the city of New York. We were hired to come and help them do some of these surveys and also do capacity building and train their own staff. And we were out and about mapping how people were behaving. You can see here in the old images of Times Square how people were sort of boggling up in the traffic islands in the middle of the space to look at the lights and experience this world-class space. About 90% of the space was just roadway, whereas 90% of the activity that was taking place was actually people. So, some of you seen these images before. the course of a 2-month summer period. So some of these projects were implemented, and we were out there mapping before and during and after. We mapped the people activity, commercial activities in shops, behavioral patterns in terms of lunch breaks, traffic issues, accidents, and all these other different things. And I've included here a small movie about the project.
The plan was to define a new way to move in the city. Broadway would be closed for traffic along the major squares from uptown to downtown. And a network of bike lanes would be built to connect with surrounding boroughs.
We're very opinionated in New York City, so there were 8.4 million opinions about what should be done.
You cannot implement European culture in America. We don't need any bicycle lanes in New York City because people don't like to ride bicycle. Because people don't have time to ride bicycle. Monday to Friday, American life is like machine.
Any type of the suggestion of change was met with resistance because it affected their everyday routine. And I think what this change was spurred on by was more of an alignment, a mechanism essentially. And I think that mechanism was the pilot project process. Overnight, essentially, the street was closed, chairs put in, tons of people used it. There was this huge latent demand that existed the entire time that just souped into this area. But it wasn't quite good enough. You know, people were saying, complaining, you know, this is cheap folding chairs from Costco. That's not New York City. That's not Times Square. So not long after that, they needed to revise their approach and get some better quality furniture. The idea was doing something and giving people a chance to experience it, not doing the perfect thing and making it right from day one. It's a shift from the one heroic vision to a more iterative evolution of what cities can become.
But as you can see, this was primarily a test where we used colored asphalt or colored tarmac, and we reconfigured the space in between the buildings. And by doing so, we were able to measure the effect of some of these redesigns, and it proved incredibly important afterwards, because half a year later we had a political process. And the politicians decided to make this a permanent project, where afterwards there was a design competition and some of these spaces have been redesigned. To me, this is quite fascinating, that more than 74% was saying that all of these spaces improved dramatically. And yet, there is no Chinese granite here. There is not sort of refined landscape architecture. It's a reconfiguration of the space, but it tells us that people are attracted to other people. And people are attracted to places where they feel safer and where there is a better environment for pedestrians and public life. But it's also about a cultural change. I think when we develop urban strategies and urban plans, we always have to remember that urban development is about building cultures. And culture is never static. Like these guys and the taxi driver say, oh, we hate this European culture. We will never change. We're like a machine. But cultures change. Like, just imagine 20 years ago, we didn't have iPhones or telephones or smartphones or all these other things that we adopt so quickly as human beings. So in New York, we have to teach people or learn people how to use the public spaces in new ways. And by doing so, we introduced summer streets where some of the avenues were closed so that they could be used for pedestrian activities, bicycling, exercising, and so forth. And it really enables you to understand and experience the city in a new way, and it changes your perception of what the city might be or might become. And I think to me, it's about changing people's everyday life. One evening, when we were on a study trip in New York with the team, we met this family father. He was on his way to baseball training with his two kids here in the middle of Manhattan on a bicycle. And he had never, ever been able to do that just a few years earlier. So to me, it's about changing that life experience. And those kids now growing up in New York streets, they will become urban citizens with new tools and new wheels, so to speak. Interestingly, now, for the past year, we've had a little bit of a grant from a foundation where we have now looked into the after studies of there's now 50 plazas, because the city had continued making these plazas in the different neighborhoods. And we've been studying how the public spaces support social interaction, social justice, equality, and community development. These are all the different spaces that have been implemented, and also the brown spaces are where there is still a lack of open space or green space or social space for those communities. But yet, there's still a lot of spaces that have been developed since then. And we have then been looking into 7 of these different plazas and the catchment areas. And they're very, very different. This is Meatpacking District, which is, of course, at the center of Manhattan, and therefore it's quite touristy and a lot of visitors there. Similar to this one, also in the center of Manhattan. But then we have Jackson Heights here in Queens. Corona Plaza also in Queens. And what is interesting in our after surveys here, after now 6-7 years of these different plaza programs, is that we can see that in our studies about 80% of the people that we have talked with, interviewed, mapped in terms of participating in different events or just taking rest in the square, are saying that they now know more people in their neighborhood because they have a meeting place. About 90% of the people that we have surveyed or questioned or researched are saying that they feel ownership to the place, which I think is incredibly important if we want those places to be public and truly public. 50% somewhat safer. So having a public space, actually, you could argue, is a social equalizer in the space and allows us to meet people in the neighborhoods that we are living across different cultures and economic backgrounds. The second project I want to show you, or just example, is from Copenhagen, that has been constantly for the past 50 years redesigning public spaces. I should say this is the image from the pedestrian street that I showed you in the beginning, with all the people, with the 80,000 people walking. This is how that street looked back in the 60s. The city has constantly sort of developed its pedestrian network, but not only as a network, now that is also coming out into the neighborhoods to ensure that there are public spaces and meeting places in the different places where people live. At the same time, the city has developed this bicycle network throughout the whole city. And now you have faces in the street in a much different way than we had earlier. In the 70s, we've always had a strong bicycle culture, but at the time, the number of bicyclists were very low. I love bicyclists because they bring faces to the streets, and it makes us feel that the street is so much more lively. It's not that I'm against cars, I just feel that we need to have more balanced systems. And allowing people to walk and bicycle in a city is actually adding to our personal freedom. Our freedom of choice to use whatever modes of transportation we would prefer relating to the trip or to the journey that we are doing exactly that day. And that is the type of freedom and life that we have gained over the last 4 years. Today, you grow up in Copenhagen as a cyclist. I don't think about myself as a cyclist. I just happen to cycle every day to work. People grow up, you see people working and wearing suits and ties. You see ministers going to the parliament on bicycle. So it's no longer something that is only for the advocates or for the people that are wanting to save the environment. It's not about exercise, it's about a lifestyle. It's a way of living. And once I had a friend who sort of said, isn't it incredibly expensive to bicycle around with this cello here? I have a friend who played in an orchestra, and that cello was worth 100,000 Danish kroner at the time. It was very, very expensive. And she said, you know what? Don't you bicycle around with your kid? I think we need to change the way we think about a lot of different things. In London, for example, they would say, oh, but we don't have space enough for bicycling. Our streets are so narrow. In London or in Copenhagen, you would say, our streets are as narrow as in London, and we don't have space for cars. And we wear normal shoes. This is me on my way to work. This is me on my very old bike, on my way to the beach. And you know, we just wear the normal clothes that we have. We don't gear up in spandex or lycra or sportswear. But there is a requirement today that you have to have a shower. If you are a workplace with more than 20 people employed, you have to have a shower facility so that people can actually bicycle to and from work. And today we have quite a remarkable split in Copenhagen. About 35% are using bicycle on an everyday basis. It's more than people using public transport. And this is what saves the city from drowning in car traffic. So there is not a single politician from right to left or to red or green parties that would be against cycling. That would be political suicide. Everybody wants to do what is good for the cyclists. Because even in the inner city, 55% of the population is today bicycling. And then you can say, oh, this is not going to work in Vienna because we have a hard winter, and we actually have a hard winter in Copenhagen too. It's quite cold and it's quite windy, and yet still 70% of the population that are bicycling during summer are continuing at winter time. And this is what I mean about good urban design supporting sustainable cultures. Because the reason people are bicycling is because the environment compels them to do so. The system is so built out that it will invite them to bicycle no matter how hard the weather is, because it's still the simplest, the easiest, and the quickest way to get around town. So those are the types of spaces we need to design in our cities. So the quality of life have changed dramatically over these 40, 50 years. We now have a wealth of public spaces. We have people moving about on foot and on bicycle in the city. And we've moved out some of the industries of the inner harbour, and we've cleared the grey waters and the water and the sewage systems and so forth. You can now swim in the inner city of the harbour and have that as a luxury sort of major central park, you may say, for the city. After having worked and implemented a lot of these projects for many, many years, Gehl was a professor. He was calculating and making the data collections at the university at the architecture school. And after about 35, 40 years, I think the city came to realize that actually putting people at the center of that decision-making has been a very, very smart strategy. Because Copenhagen today is now a much richer city, a more competitive city than it was in the early 80s and the 90s, where the city was broke. Nobody wanted to live in the city, they moved out to the suburbs and so forth. So we helped the city make a strategy that was called Metropolis for People, and they wanted to be the best city in order to put people in the center of their decision making. Now, where is Copenhagen heading now? You can say we have the same situation as in Vienna. We are densifying the city with about 1,000 people per month. So approximately 12,000 people per year is moving to Copenhagen. I think that's very similar to Vienna. So we have the ambition to grow the number of citizens, yet reach a zero emission target by 2025. And that is a very, very, very ambitious goal. So Copenhagen municipality is the Carbon Neutral City Alliance under the ZUKUNFT network. But they have also realized that if they should reach the carbon zero targets, they cannot do it alone. So the new strategy that they've just politically adopted here a month ago is called co-creation. Because they actually need to get there by behavioral change and by collaboration with other partners. So I'm looking very much forward to see the new innovations that will be coming up in Copenhagen in the new decade in front of us. And then I have a couple of projects that I want to show you about process. Because I think it's all about moving away, as I mentioned, from the projects towards process and engaging people in new ways. I was first contacted by the city of Gothenburg about 5 years ago. They wanted to do a new master plan for the Blue Ring, which is the city center and the old industrial park. And they contacted me because they wanted me to write a competition brief and set up a traditional architecture competition. And then I sort of started calling some of my friends up in Gothenburg. I spoke with some of the professors at the academy and the architecture school up there, and I spoke with a few people in private practice, and then I came back and said to them, I will design this competition brief for you, only if you promise me that you will implement the winning entry. And then the politician sort of looked at me and said, what do you mean by implementing the winning entry? Yeah. We just want to have good ideas. And then I said, then let's not make a competition and waste a lot of hours of architecture teams that are going to work in silos in their homes, not in dialogue with the city and so forth. Let's come together and design something which is much more about sharing knowledge and creating those good ideas together. And then we can see what you are up to in terms of implementing. I think this is very much the same thing that Hamburg has been doing with their big charrettes, or probably also other cities. But for Gothenburg, which is probably the most industrial city of all of Scandinavia, they've had Volvo, they've had all the big sort of harbour activity, it's the biggest harbour in all of Scandinavia. This was pretty new thinking for them. But developing a vision is about getting a lot of people, a lot of different stakeholders to start moving in the right direction. And it's not just about making a document, it's about making a process stay alive over a much longer period of time. So we did an international workshop. We had 10 international teams come to Gothenburg and work together for 5 days. And they ended up with kind of a TED Talk format. And after that, the step 2 was that we developed this tool for change, where the vision would stay in the middle, and we would work in terms of learning, integrated planning, with cooperation, participation from citizens, and with the leaders involved. And that last element was super important. On our second day, we invited the council to come and see what we were doing in the international workshop. How many politicians do you think showed up? 1? 0 politicians showed up. And, you know, I was saying to the project manager out there that I think one of your biggest challenges is the disconnect between the political leadership and the technical team in the administration. And they said, no, it's not that bad. But then, having this event and then not a single politician showed up, I think that was an eye-opener for a lot of the people working in Gothenburg. A lot of politicians in cities today, they don't understand how the city as an urban fabric can be a tool for them to implement their policies. But the city is a tool for making people more healthy, or engage children more in society, or whatever ambitions you have for the elderly, and so forth and so forth. The city can be a tool. And that took that eye-opener up in Gothenburg for the politicians to learn that. So we have been working on this integrated manner in terms of hardware, all the physical stuff, software, being the culture and what is taking place, and as well as the organization. The step 3, which we are at this year, is about establishing a consortium that are going to build the first step and the first stage of the Frihamnen. This is also where Ravneburg have been designing a sort of a hot sauna as a temporary building as an early activation of one of the industrial sites. And the plan is being developed together with several developers. And only after they have developed a shared plan, they will be allowed to bid on the individual places that they are going to build. So this is quite an experiment. Maybe we can only do this because the city actually owns the site. But I'm quite sort of excited about this process and hope that we can get to a plan where the developers are actually collectively taking responsibility for creating quality environment and not just quality buildings. And again, it's all about doing it together, the cities, the developers, the citizens, and so forth together. And our role in this process has been very much the one of the expert and the process designer, but also the facilitator of meetings. And then we've been documenting the process. So it's not been a product as such, but it's been about documenting the process. And that is incredibly important. When you start working in a process, you have to constantly document it and get the mayor and get the decision makers to sign off. So every time you are at a milestone, you make a little document and have the mayor stamp it and sign it and whatever is needed, so that you can get that approval and move to the next step. This is illustrating to you that the role of our national policymakers and the role of our municipalities are changing. We are moving away from a more static, sort of waiting for projects to come to us type approach to a much more actively facilitating, collaborating, working together. This is the new way of working, and this is the traditional way of working. Similarly, you could say that in the old paradigm, we had a goal to deliver good projects. Projects would come in, we would implement it, and at the very best, we would evaluate it. But in the new paradigm, we are proactively working together across civil society, across advocates, across municipalities, across universities and designers and architects and individuals. And the goal here is added value or shared value. It's a combination of a top-down and bottom-up process at the same time, a grassroots and a grass-tops type process. And just to finish off with the master planning framework, to illustrate to you how we are working with these new developments, we have been working on this site in Gehl for a couple of years. And in France, as you all know, they have this tradition of the grand projet. These big projects and big boulevards and so forth. It has been part of the French history, maybe even also in Vienna, for many, many years. The Ringstraße, right? And the big buildings. But we are moving away from this way of thinking to the grand process, to understanding how we can actually collaborate and work together. Of course, it was important for us to get into, to connect all the different streets around this old rail area, to make sure that this became an element of the urban tissue, and it didn't become something of its own. One of the only buildings on the site is this very, very, very long rail terminal that we actually suggested that it was being kept so that we could develop some type of incubator type space for new startup tech businesses. Because Gehl is in a very interesting strategic location with only 1 hour or 2 hours to London and about 1 hour to Paris. On the other part of the site, we developed a grid that had the same dimensions as some of the inner city blocks of Wien, and started to sort of work with that grid in order to make sure that we had a green connector or green urban movement come in. And that helped us define 3 different neighbourhoods, 3 different communities, so to speak, within the site. And constantly sort of massaging these neighbourhoods so that we start creating these little spaces. So our idea was very much about the human scale, was about developing a development that sort of matched the existing surroundings as much as possible. And I think the reason we won this competition was because of the process and the way we engaged the city. We had 3 interviews in the process before getting here. And I think also they had done the station project with Copenhagen. And I think they had enough bigness in Gehl, and they wanted some smallness. This is some of the urban blocks that you see. This is the scale that they had in Gehl already, and this is what we have proposed. So we are trying to sort of move closer to the urban scale of the existing city. For every one of those little communities within the site, we wanted that community to have a little bit of their own meeting place, their own heart for the development. We organized the traffic in a way so that we would also, between different blocks, we would have a little bit of a shared space together. And that central part would be more or less pedestrianized, or kind of a pedestrian priority space with parking around it, and with the taller buildings toward the walls, so that we could have the sun coming in to those spaces in between the buildings. And we started sort of designing some of those intermediate spaces, and also all the way down to the size of the individual buildings. So going through the different levels of scale, we wanted to have a mix of uses and a mix of buildings in the area. Designing the coalition or the relationship between the buildings so that we could have these courtyards. That was a very, very new concept in France. And they called it the Nordic blocks, because we were talking a lot about the fact that we had this semi-private courtyard space in the middle that would allow you to open up your windows and sleep in the night with an open window and stuff like that. That for us in Scandinavia feels very traditional, very, very normal, but in a French context, where a lot of buildings are designed and built as standalone buildings, that was quite new. And this is just an example of how we integrate parking and some of the outer ring structures, but all the way down to how we are organizing every apartment so that the more active spaces were towards the street and the living room and other towards the back. And this is just an image of how we were envisioning that some of these inner courtyards could be. So the plan has actually now been transformed into a local area plan. Urbanisation, as a development agency, has taken over the sites, and now we will be moving into that first designing phase. The way we think about master planning is very much to have a strong vision, not necessarily to have a fixed plan, but the actual framework of the public spaces is important. So that vision of what that place is going to be is super important. But then rather than having sort of a fixed plan, we are trying to develop a master plan framework for the public spaces, strong strategies and qualitative guidelines for how the buildings can then be built over a much longer period of time. And then we have to have strong strategic urban management to make sure that the buildings stay within that framework and follow it. We allow more flexibility than if we just designed and finalized every building from the beginning. So those were the projects that I felt like sharing with you today about life, about space, about process. It all relates back to the major issues that our societies and our cities are dealing with today. And I hope that some of that will be of inspiration to your project, and I'm looking forward to see more of that tomorrow. If you have more time, I also brought a few slides from the work that we've just done last year on the next class. But you want to see that? Yeah? Another 5 minutes? Nobody's falling asleep? Okay. Okay, so approximately a year ago now, I was called up right before Christmas last year and was asked whether we were to join sort of a vision process for the Ringstraße here in Gehl. So I've just taken a very few slides with me from this project, and it was kind of a sketchy process, very quickly done. But our concept was that we need to move away from Ringstraße being this traffic barrier with a focus on world-class buildings only to become a world-class street. And also, by mentioning a world-class street, we actually have to think about the legibility and and the understanding of the whole street as a space, enhancing the different spaces and amenities along the street, but then also making sure that we have more local connectors to the surrounding neighborhoods. There is a lot of space on Ringstrasse, as you know, and there are many possibilities in a lot of places to widen the sidewalks and to still allow quite a lot of traffic through the street. But it does need calming because it is a major traffic barrier in the city as it is today. And we just did a couple of sort of visualizations. This is a very long stretch, and you feel that distance over that street is massive. But by widening the sidewalks and minimizing that centerpiece of traffic dominance, I think you would feel that distance being much less. We also looked at how to, in different stages and over a longer period of time, to start developing those spaces. And I think actually the university plays an important role here in terms of activating the Ringstrasse, because the university is one of these amenities or buildings that are placed over a large period or large area. And again, just a little image of how that space could change in the future.